Hello world of YouTube, I'm sitting in the editing bay and realized I never did an intro or an outro for this month's listening log. Welcome to the February listening log update. I've got 9 albums that I spun throughout February that I'm going to be talking about in this video, with time codes listed in the description with each individual review if you would like to jump around the video. Handful of things that I was excited for to drop, along with some interesting things that I decided to dive into, given it was still a relatively light month for me. But give it a like if you're excited, and let's go ahead and get started.
Wrapping up my therapy, emotion like they jelly bean. She just wants some ketamine. This right here.
You know, producers like Conductor Williams and The Alchemist have really been in a renaissance of sorts, and The Alchemist in particular has really been running some gamuts lately. He's actually got another collab album dropping this month that I plan on talking about in my March update. But this Larry June, 2 Chainz Alchemist collab, Life is Beautiful, I wasn't wholly sure what to expect, because while I haven't talked about Larry June, I've sampled his music here and there upon friends' recommendations, and obviously I've talked about 2 Chainz in the past, but I didn't know necessarily how those two would jive together chemistry-wise, and how they would feel over the Alchemist production, especially 2 Chainz in particular. I love 2 Chainz, but like this sort of very lush style that the Alchemist typically sort of pulls together in his instrumental palettes aren't normally the things that I hear him sort of spit over, but I think he suits that elegance with some grounded storytelling that lets his punchline style still stick, but it gives it a sort of reality that I think it sits in really strongly, and I think Larry June sort of complements a lot of that and brings his own world into it just as solidly. I love the way they both slide on that reversed beat of Colossal. I love 2 Chainz' wordplay on LLC. I think they both sound fantastic on the title track as well. That flute flip is just elegant as hell. That sort of elegance suits the storytelling that both deliver on I Ben really strongly as well, and sits as another highlight for me. I also love how 2 Chainz' hype style that he's bringing to a track like Epiphany doesn't feel juxtaposed against the lower key minimalism of Epiphany. I actually think it creates this really interesting pairing that I honestly really love, and adds some nice vibrancy in that back end also. I think this album's really solid. I've spun it like probably more than most records I spun in February, and I always found myself enjoying the experience, and I think the collaborative chemistry on this project between these three is also really potent. Sure, I was left wanting it at least a little bit more, but I was also kind of happy with what I was brought. But I was also really happy with what these three brought to the table, and I think that as far as, like, being an idea that I was maybe pretty unsure of, I think that on the other side, I don't know why I doubted these three one bit. I'm going to be giving this a 7 out of 10. Another really solid album I spun from this month, and a really nice just series of instrumentals from The Alchemist by and large, but I'm not really surprised by that either. While I didn't spin any full albums during the Mangini era of Dream Theater, I'd heard little snippets, and I, like, don't want to knock the rest of the band for continuing to pillage on without Portnoy, but as somebody who is a pretty big Portnoy fan, I agreed with what he had shared as far as, like, Dream Theater being his sort of baby, and I decided to sit out a lot of the Mangini era. But he's back now with this new album with the band Parasomnia, an album that tries to go hard on the concept, in a concept that I think is pretty interesting as somebody who throughout his entire life has dealt with issues with sleep and, you know, had a fascination with dreams. I like the ideas in the melting pot that they're cooking with on here. You know, I feel like if any other band would have written a song about the Shadow Man, I don't think it would have hit quite as hard as the sprawling closer that sends this record off into its end. And I honestly think that The Road to It has other interesting songs that I think the band conceptually really weaves together well. The paranoia felt on a track like A Broken Man, and sort of throughout the and sort of on the confrontational Midnight Messiah and Dead Asleep, which dives into these psychotic and unhinged tendencies that crop up throughout sleep, I think are all really strong ideas that I think on paper, honestly, read really well. My issue with the record more goes with the sonics. I enjoy the instrumentation here. the guitar solos and keyboard solos are all really nicely done. While Mike isn't really like going all out with some of the drum stuff, hearing his grooves with this band just sounds right. And I think that they haven't sounded stronger as a unit, in my opinion. But the production on here lets some of that artistry get buried. You know, yeah, the guitars really pop, and the guitar work on here has this nice melding of heaviness and just straightforward prog ideas that I think both work well. But like some of the keyboard solos, and for how punchy some of the drums sound and some of the ideas Mike's going, I feel like they could have sat better in the backdrop, and it lends to some of the proggier extensions on here sound a bit muted in a way that I just kind of got more and more turned off by the more that I respun this. But as far as like diving back into this band, I think that this is a really solid splash. I just think that it needs a little bit of a retooling, but I like the ideas here. I like how they pull a lot of them together, and it's nice to hear this band again. I do plan on doing a video analyzing their whole discography, so I'll have to get to the Mangini stuff eventually. But as far as standing with where Portnoy first left the band, I honestly think this is a bit better than at least some of the last couple of releases he was doing with the band. It's not my favorite album by the group, but I think that as far as being a solid notch in a stacked discography, I think that it stands amongst those records. I'm giving this a 6 out of 10. I think that it's a really strong album in some regards. It's just held back tremendously in others.
I'm sure, isn't it obvious? You know that we got
This new Alessia Cara album, I'll admit, was not on my radar whatsoever. She's not amongst my favorite pop stars that cropped up in the 2010s. She's not my least favorite either, but she kind of set in this meddling realm where she had some solid songs, she had a decent voice, but not enough to compel me to push farther into diving into her artistry. I saw Mark from Spectrum Pulse was really digging this record, though, and given February was relatively slow for me, I figured I'd give it a chance. And honestly, I'm really glad I did. One thing I wasn't expecting was an attention to, like, a fuller sound than, like, the 2010 stuff she was really pulling together. Like, the crescendos amongst tracks like Drive and Dead Man, which is a real standout for me, stand as these emotional peaks, while a lot of the record sits in sort of a lower key realm that I could have expected from her, at least, you know, performance style. You know, your Isn't It Obviouses and your Run Run, which have their own emotional twists and cattiness in the case of Run Run, but don't really reach those same peaks. They sit in the lower key realm. I even like where those set instrumentally, because they create this more almost like tangent from the realms of like, because they present this almost like modern twist on like a sophista-pop laid-back style without some of the sort of acoustic ambiance that I think would very much enrich some of the sound here, but I think Alessia uses to at least ground the record amidst some of the emotional, you know, side streets that the lyrics go through and some of the highs that the sonics take you through amidst that. Hell, Nighttime Thing with its, you know, small string usage, I would almost argue is that kind of adaptation that I would love to see more of, but at least is teased in a nice little nugget. There's some songs where I don't think that low-key mood culminates to any sort of real resonance with me, like your Fires or your Garden interludes, but even those tracks, by the by, I would say more embody the meddlingness that I felt about Alessia Cara going into this record than I would say stand out as like absolute bad moments. They just more are the closest I could see to like a skip if I'm not just playing the record front to back, which I think is very easy to do. It's a very easy, smooth listen, this record, and I think that if you like pop music that has a good sense of weight, and I don't mean that in like a grand sort of way. Alessia Cara really much sits in her own realm on this, but she does so wonderfully. And I like the emotional back and forth she takes you through on here. I'm giving this a 7. It's just a very well-constructed record that I enjoyed the time that I spent with it.
But he's a real nice guy.
Squid were one of those bands I'd seen popping up and popping off around the time that like Black Country New Road were starting to make some waves, and like Black Midi were starting to make some waves. But they were the only one of those like newer up and coming bands that I hadn't checked out until their newest album Cowards released. I finally used this as my chance to hop onto the British post-punk band's hype train, and I gotta say, I'm kind of kicking myself for not really diving in sooner, because I'm really enjoying the sort of darker corners of the world and of man that the band sort of pulls together across this release, and I enjoy their style, I enjoy the production on this, I enjoy a lot of the sort of components of this that I think make for a really good listening experience. Sort of akin to some of those ideas that some of those bands are doing, but in a much more refined, tightened manner. Like, they're still getting artsy, and they're doing cool stuff, like utilizing, you know, nice orchestration and horns on tracks like the title track and Across the Field Works Twosome, but they still have this interesting bite amidst their sort of light guitar play and sort of fun, tight drum work that I think elevates it into a different realm altogether. You know, tracks like Blood on the Boulders and Cro-Magnon Man and Showtime have this cattiness to them that both and amplifies some of the messaging of them, but creates this mood that I think helps put this record in this sort of seedier realm that I think they dance in well. And adding, you know, songs like the very krautrock-inspired Building 650 also put this band's sonic character into a realm all their own that I also just very much appreciate how they execute that kind of influence and sort of create this cocktail that I've really loved to drink time and time again. There's just an unhingedness amidst all of this that I just have also loved coming back to as a whole, that I definitely think that if you've enjoyed, you know, where parts of rock, especially out of England, are sort of diving into and you haven't checked out Squid, very much check this out. I'm going to listen to their older work after this too, because I enjoy their very on-the-nose influences in some points. Like, the opener Creepy Skin especially feels very much like a sort of Radiohead-inspired jam. And I know that I'm sort of amplifying the messages that people have already had about appreciating this band, but I'm very much now on board with the hype of this. I dig this a lot. I don't know if it's going to be amongst my very top favorites of the year, but I could see this landing somewhere in the middle to lower end of any given year-end list. I'm going to give this an 8. It's a pretty good album. I dig this a lot.
It's a rude world. It's a rude, rude world.
Judging by my singles list, you guys probably already knew I was excited for Cheekface's Middle Spoon, and it's a record that once it had its surprise announcement, my anticipation grew immensely. On the other side of Middle Spoon, I will say, similarly to It's Sorted, it does a good job at placing these gems they released over the last year across a record that sees them still expanding their horizons and growing as a unit while pushing their paranoid, relatively dystopian, but still trying to unify message that I think hits just as hard as it did on It's Sorted, honestly. There's some moments on here that were a really lovely surprise that I think helped sort of reaffirm some of the collaborations that went into this record that they were teasing, in the vein of like Jeff Rosenstock on Hard Mode, which I was not expecting to be the closer, but I do think is a phenomenal closer to this album. I think that similarly to some of their highs they've been building to up to this point, and again, especially It's Sorted, the hook writing on this is just incredible, which I was already expecting, again, given the likes of Hard Mode and Flies, but like Living Lo-Fi is an incredible, flashy, sort of mission statement style opener to really ground the listener in the perspective of this record that I think the band carries you through masterfully. I think Rude World, being this very laid-back ska-inspired jam, is also executed very fucking well with a hook that is just incredibly infectious. Tracks like Military Gum and Art House create this 1-2 punch of that same very postmodern forward writing style shining across the board. Content Baby is this sort of full circle self-realization that I've talked about having mixed feelings on in the past depending on the execution. And I think that Content Baby very much treads those lines, but I still think on the other side is a fucking catchy-ass banger. This album, stellar. So fucking stellar. I love what they pulled together here. Another choice release from a band that just continues to improve and impress. This is getting another 9 out of 10. Easily another one of my favorites to drop early in the year from a band who ended up at the year-end list, even though they had a January release. Something that I will say I feel like does not happen enough in music analysis, but can still be shown to be achievable if the music is that good. And I think Middle Spoon is another record like that. Fantastic stuff. If you still haven't listened to Cheekface after the mounds of praise and recommendation I've given them, I don't know what else is going to do it for you. This thing fucking slaps.
Fly apparel, I judge them all like the high sparrow. Your mind's narrow, in deep thought you die shallow.
While I haven't paid attention to anything he's done over the last 10 years, I saw the Detroit rapper Black Milk dropped into the record. This time, another collaboration with other Detroit rapper Fat Ray, Food from the Gods. And what I love about this very concise little pocket project is I think that it is a solid nugget that reaffirms chemistry and sees these two artists bringing together this well-harnessed, ethereal-sounding rap album. It sounds like something stripped from the cosmos in a flashy, hazy little blur that I think really creates a fun listen time and time again. They really chop it up in the haze on a track like Elderberry and fit the groove Kane while they weave these stories and paint this picture of a tough life. Really getting into the nitty-gritty of the past and crime on a track like Kane that I think shines. I love seeing Black Milk and Danny Brown come back together on Just Say No, given that was my introduction to Black Milk's artistry, was a lot of collaborations between those two. I also think that Danny's mellow flow on that really matches Ray and Milk's energy on that track tenfold. I think that instrumental is in a slice of a just really funky groove that feels indebted to the atmosphere the album has been throttling with, but pivots it ever so slightly. Same could kind of be said with the collaboration with Bruiser Wolf Frankie Lyman, while a bit more steeped in the lo-fi edge that coats a lot of the record that I think is done so excellently. It's got that same kind of like personal touch that Bruiser brings to it that I think really gels well with the other two. It feels like a record sort of wrought from just some sessions between two friends, and that's honestly, I think, the best compliment I can give it. You know, the way that Frankie Lyman gives way to that bluesy guitar sample on El Hongo, I think helps push the record into its final stretches amicably well. I think if you've enjoyed some of the outputs from Detroit that I've recommended in the past, or enjoy some of the artistry from artists like Bruiser Wolf or Danny Brown, and you haven't given Black Milk a spin, give him a spin in general, but this is a really solid album that happened to come out this year. I'm giving this a 7 out of 10. It's not my favorite rap album or rap collaboration I've heard in recent memory, but it's one that I would definitely be happy to revisit, and I will say spinning this got me to dive back into Black Milk's earlier records that I knew very well, and it's always really nice to get a refresher on some old favorites, you know? Brady Matteson, friend of the channel, Chicago synth drone lover and ambient music maker, has dropped the newest in a line of solo albums where he's been sort of evolving a love of ambient music throughout a variety of emotional facets, all culminating to his newest album, Sirens from Monoliths, an album that he's been heavily promoting. I could tell he's very much, while he was also very proud of the sad, dreary sounds within Paper Hearts, it was clear that he was very much trying to aim higher with this newest album. And by looking at the track listing and these like gargantuan songs, the title Sirens from Monoliths feels all the more clear. I feel like while I love the melancholic ideas he was very much spinning on Paper Hearts, I absolutely adore the patience he has to build these ambient tracks into these huge sounding sort of waves that have these ebbs and flows of intensity that I think really culminate to easily his best album to date. You know, the cyclical approach seen in the opener Monolith very much feels in the camp of some of his records over the last couple of years prior to Paper Hearts, and that sort of melancholic edge still creeps out throughout pockets of this, like Love Do Not Leave Me Here, Dress Me As Your Mannequin, which very much sits in this more sparse world, but there's this air of just sorrow sort of permeating throughout the waves that I think adds a nice little like emotional pivot from some of the scale seen on especially the couple tracks prior. Like I See the Devil's Face in Places, I Do Not Want to Look, which is this awesome sort of like spin on some really uneasy sounds and some really dissonant chords that again I think sort of just build to this nice, just well constructed full portrait, you know, before sort of like breaking away. The same can be said for Where Is the Embrace of Letting Go, a song that uses, again, these very static-filled sounds with these dissonant chords to sort of wash over the listener and create this sort of air of uneasement, but not necessarily one steeped in fear, if that makes any sense. Unlike what some of the other tracks prior in the track listing are sort of bringing out. I really love the lo-fi edge on a lot of this too. Like the last couple tracks in particular, I think have these really cool moments where this buzzing synth sort of coats the atmosphere and sort of adds this edge to it that I think he really channels pretty gracefully. I like this record. I think that if you like ambient music, if you've listened to Brady stuff in the past, or if you haven't, this is a really good one. If you're a fan of ambient music, if you like, you know, a use of space, if you like a good use of space, if you like just well-produced synth music, this is a good example of that. I'm giving this an 8 out of 10. It's a really strong album, and again, easily, in my opinion, his best work yet. I absolutely adore this thing, and I hope it just keeps building up from here, honestly. And I honestly think that his horizons are larger than ever on the other side of spinning this record.
Is that your bestie? I'm an ice boy beyond like Gretzky. I'ma at you like bless me. Hit the dance.
Even if it was more morbidly so than with a record like GNX, I was curious to hear what Drake was going to release post everything that happened between him and Kendrick last year that I'm not going to talk about extensively in this video because I've already done so on the channel. Because I've already done so on other videos on this channel that you could go ahead and watch. With that in mind, this collab album with OVO, Signy, Party Next Door, Some Sexy Songs for You, on paper, honestly made a lot of sense. You know, if Drake was going to pivot away from the beef and really double down on doing what kind of Kendrick said he should do in the vein of just making them dance and waving their hands, that seemed like the right call to make. You know, it was an album that he was going to release on Valentine's Day. It was going to be this sensually driven experience to sort of, I thought, really uplift parts of the angle he was going at against Kendrick and being in the most backhanded, non-actual truthful ways pro-woman, because his whole angle in the battle was going at this narrative of Kendrick and Whitney. But even in that breath, the album doesn't achieve that. Because there's handfuls of songs on here where, because of Drake, some of that mood is really tarnished with this bitter attitude that really makes for a very unsexy listen, no matter how hard some of the backdrops really try to paint this sexual atmosphere, or how Party Next Door on parts of this try to paint a sexy atmosphere. Sure, amidst some of the mounds of overextensions that do crop up throughout this album, there are still nuggets, because at the end of the day, Drake has a batch of songwriters that can really help craft a really strong hit. They know his character that he has in the limelight. That's why tracks like Crying in Chanel and Nokia, to some degree, have been hitting for people. They even try to pivot that into some of the tendencies that he was already doing pre the beef on tracks like Gimme a Hug and Celibacy and Glorious. But on the other side of the events of that, some of that bitterness just really cuts through and lends to some bars that really stand out amongst the moments where Drake's really trying to lay it down classic Drake style. And even if I don't like the hook of a track like Spider-Man, Superman, I think that Party Next Door sells it better than Drake on that song. Same with CN Tower, honestly. I think that Drake kind of bogs that song down, in my opinion. On top of that, I think Glorious is like a really weird phrase track that gave me the same uneasiness that Ice Spice's last album did in the tone of its lyrics, but I just don't like how Drake sounds on there. It's giving really not good behavior in a very dangerous way. And other moments like Meet Your Padre, where it feels like Drake trying to dazzle with another magical trick in the vein of a genre dive, I don't think land as well because of the other context surrounding the record. I don't know. I know that some people, judging by the backdrop, aren't going to be surprised by my score, but I didn't really like this on the other side. I will say I'm probably going to hear worse albums from this year, but I don't think this is going to stray too far from near the top of that list at the end of the year, even if it is a little early to call for that. Because there are some songs that, again, stand out. You know, outside of Crying in Chanel, and honestly Drake's part of the hook on Something About You that I think has good chemistry, that I think blends really well with Party Next Door's portion. I think Small Town Fame as a soul joint, while being a moment that kind of tries to dissect, has a really strong instrumental behind it that gives classic Drake. It, again, is just sort of moody and tarnished with a bitterness that sours the experience in a way that, like, feels vintage Drake, but feels all the more bitter within the context of this project. I'm going to be giving this a 3, because outside of it just kind of feeling a bit long, it is bogged down by Drake's artistry failing to dazzle, in my opinion, once again. And Party Next Door's portions, outside of the ones that highlight, blend with the tapestries better than his, but also do so to almost a monotonous degree sometimes. I wouldn't say I'm the biggest fan of Party Next Door outside of really his collaborations on Ghost Town, but I don't think he's the strongest component of even that song. I don't think he's ever been the strongest component of any song that I've heard him on, and I feel like on a record like this, because it's surrounded by a myriad of other ideas in the pot and, you know, tapestry that sort of blends into those themes on top of that, it creates for a bit more of an exhausting experience. Rebecca Black's last album, Let Her Burn, saw a rebirth of the artist that showed her embracing more of her tastes as they evolved from her childhood roots that she sort of teased on the remix of Friday 10 years after the fact. And on Salvation, she goes further down that pipeline to bring us a pocket project that I think quality-wise stands above Let Her Burn, but sets itself just a little too short, in my opinion, considering how much energy is really pushing throughout this entire release. You know, similarly, you can tell she's been very much inspired by the club scene that inspired some very popular facets of pop music last year. But I love where she takes that influence in the veins of really going harder on the bold dance-style production that I think sets it apart from some of those contemporaries, but I still think dances among them just as strongly. Which, I mean, out the gate, I think it really sets a stage very amicably with the title track showcasing this love of bold sounds and a very four-on-the-floor kinetic energy that gets flipped into some fun ways. That gets flipped into some really fun ways, like the very bright and still erratic Sugar Water Cyanide, or the two really low-end rumbling tracks that send it off with Do You Even Think About Me and Twist the Knife. Do You Even Think About Me has this like real drive to it that I think evokes that sort of nighttime heavy synth sound that was very big at like the end of the 2010s and has sort of gotten readapted over the last couple of years outside of the realms of pop. But I also love how she's got her own other more just synth pop leaning sounds, like on American Doll or on one of the singles Trust, which I think pen these really catchy hooks and infectious melodies to sort of weave throughout the dance atmosphere. I think this record is, again, just a really good expansion on, evolution of Rebecca Black's artistry. I think just more so than Let Her Burn, I want so much more of this sonic identity. And it's kind of a shame that it's just shy of 30 minutes. Again, it's a very brief little pocket project. But I love the sound she has here. And I think that if she were to, say, do a deluxe edition, this would very much be a record that I think deserves it. Because the sounds here are really choice. I just wish there's a bit more on the table. It's a nice appetizer, but I was really wanting an entree with the sounds that are pushing throughout this. I still think it's solid, though. I'd give it a 7. I'd be teetering on an 8, potentially. But again, every time I've respun this, I just kept wishing there was a little more on the table. It was the only album that was really closing out the month that I knew I had to get to. But, really strong one. I feel like if you've been sleeping on Rebecca Black, her 2 records she's dropped over the last couple of years, very much worth it. And showcase some real artistic growth that I'm happy to see her go through. And that's what I spun. Did you enjoy my thoughts? Did you agree? Did you disagree? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Again, if you'd like to, give it a like. If you want to see more, consider subscribing. I drop 2 to 4 vids a week depending on what I've got going on. Barring the chaos of the weekend, I plan on doing a live stream on here Sunday night to listen to Pimp a Butterfly, to celebrate it turning 10 this year. So if that ends up happening, I'll see you there. But if not, I'll see you next week for more fun shit. Thanks for watching this. I've been Viral. You guys will get these lots of situations, and I'll see you another day.